So we're going to start our third week of exploring the Five Skandhas. So we're just going to do a bit of a recap of what we've done over the last few weeks. So first of all, we'll just have a summary of the Five Skandhas. So the skandhas can be translated as heaps or aggregates, and they're form, consciousness, perception, feeling tone, and volition. And we saw that by understanding the nature of the Five Skandhas, we can start to free ourselves from suffering. We also looked at form in more detail in terms of the the 4 elements and the 5 or 6 bases of consciousness, sense bases. So we'll just keep the screen up at this point. So we have the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. These are 4 parts of rupa. And then last week we looked at the 6 consciousnesses, which are based on the 6 sense bases. So we have eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, body consciousness, and mind consciousness. So today we're looking at samnya. So we'll have a look at what samnya is going to mean. So it's usually translated as perception. It can also be translated as recognition, interpretation, and conception. So recognition, interpretation, and conception. So it's the awareness of an object's distinctive characteristics or marks. So what makes something separate or distinctive from something else. And samnya, perception, can also include processes of mental labeling, of memory, and abstract thought. So we're going to be exploring all these aspects of perception. And we're going to look at some characteristics of perception, which should be the next slide. If we can have the next slide, please. There we go. Good. So we can classify samnya in relation to the 6 sense bases and their consciousnesses. So we get 6 types of samnya that way. We can classify perception as whether it's accurate or inaccurate, whether it's clear or unclear, whether it is without characteristics, and also related to each of the 3 realms of existence. So we're going to be looking at these classifications this morning and hopefully understanding both more about perception of samnya and also getting a sense of its conditioned nature. Okay, thank you. So let's start with the 6 samnyas, 6 perceptions. So just going to take an example of an object that we're seeing. So maybe the screen in front of you. So there's an object out there, as it were, and there's light comes from that object. It strikes the eye, which is the sense base, and there's a consciousness of that striking. So we have an eye consciousness, so we're aware of something visual coming in. And then perception labels what that is. So as we look around, we may see a computer screen. We can look around the room. We may see a chair, a table, and so on. So we're labeling what we're conscious of all the time. And we do that through the six senses. So what we see, what we hear, what we smell, what we taste, what we touch, and also the mind sense. So as we've been looking at last week, the mind sense is a chitta, and chitta has the connotation of both heart and mind. So with mind perception, it's aware of, if you like, our emotional state. It's aware of our thoughts, our abstract thoughts. It's almost perception or perception at times. Aware of our habitual tendencies, aware of our desires and what moves us. And the whole process of perception is almost like we're trying to compare what we know here with what we're seeing from outside. So an example of this, I just want you to imagine you're meeting a friend in a park, and you get there before your friend and you're sitting on a bench, and there's various people walking towards you in the park. And there's a process of, is this my friend coming towards me? And you may kind of go, no, that's the wrong sex. They've got the wrong hair color. Ooh, that could be them. That looks similar to them. And as they get closer, there's still a comparison with your image of your friend and what you're seeing visually. And you're seeing whether those two connect, whether there's, it's my friend or not. So there may be someone coming towards you who looks like your friend from a distance, and as you get closer, you realize, no, that's not them. And then at another time, your friend does turn up, and there is a recognition, this is my friend. So there's this process of comparing an idea of what our friend looks like, and seeing whether that matches with our sense experience and our sense consciousnesses. So this is the basic samnya, basic perception. It's a labeling of our experience. And this labeling is conditioned. The obvious condition is language. So if you speak a different language, you'll have different labels for the same object. So we learn the labels. So move on. So perception can be accurate or inaccurate. So it's worth looking at this. It's almost like, is our perception of something correct or incorrect? A classic example from the Indian tradition is you go into a building and there's a rope and you mistake it for a snake. We don't really have many snakes in this country, so it's probably not something we're that concerned about. But many years ago, I did have this experience the other way around. I was in Australia and I was staying with some family, and the houses where we were staying had quite high drives, and there was quite a big step on the curb. And one person round the corner from where I was staying had a big thick rope, a grey rope. It was quite shiny and frayed at the ends. Just so as you drove up, it just was less hard on the car. And I was driving away from the house I was staying, and I thought, there's a rope. Why is that rope in the road? Why would someone have moved that? And as I got closer, it wasn't a rope, it was a snake. So my initial label was incorrect. I went, there's a rope in the road. And it turned out to be a silvery coloured python. So yeah, sometimes our perceptions can be accurate and sometimes it can be inaccurate. So it's worth bearing that in mind. I think there's something for me, particularly when I get onto mental perceptions. I've noticed over the years, I get a sense of safety, of comfort or something from understanding what's going on either internally or externally. So something may come up in meditation, or there may be an interaction with some people in my life, and I'm unsure about it. And my tendency is to make up a story. So I actually know what's going on. I have a perception of what's going on in the situation. And through that perception, it gives me a sense of safety. I know what's going on here. I know why they're behaving a particular way, or I know why I'm feeling a particular way. And I started to realize quite often that this knowing of what's going on was an inaccurate perception. I just kind of made it up to make me feel better about myself, rather than just staying with the more uncomfortable experience of actually going, I don't know what's going on here. So that can be quite interesting. And it's worth looking at our own experience, whether we do this, whether we make up stories, inaccurate perceptions of what's happening in a situation to make us feel better. And I think we do this quite a lot. So that's accurate and inaccurate. Touching on it briefly, there's probably quite a lot you can reflect on that. We then come on to clear and unclear perception. So this has two aspects. The first one is, do we actually, on an everyday level, perceive what's going on? Do we perceive the environment around us? And I suspect a lot of the time we don't perceive this clearly. So let's just do a little exercise. So I want you to imagine or bring to mind the Tower of London. Hopefully we're all familiar with the Tower of London. And when I say bring to mind the Tower of London, you probably have some image of the Tower of London. It may be Traitor's Gate. It may be the tower itself. It may be a beefeater, maybe ravens, maybe the outside wall. Maybe you went down to London a couple of years ago when they had all the roses going over the wall. Not roses, poppies. So we have an image of the Tower of London in our minds. We know that image is not the Tower of London. It's just an image. It's an idea of the Tower of London. So I think as we go through our lives, a lot of the time, we actually just have images of what we think is there, and we're not really paying attention clearly to what we are perceiving. It's almost like we have a map, maybe a map on our phone, and we're going round and we're looking at the map and we're looking at the bit in front, but we're not actually looking at the environment around us. So I think it can be like that. So we have a map of our everyday experience. We have a map of the room we're currently in. We have a map of our house. We have a map of the places we visit. So we actually use the map much more than clearly perceiving what's there. So we have an image in our mind of a table, maybe of a sofa, of a computer, and we rarely fully clearly perceive that object. So maybe just look at the room around you. Maybe look at an object. It may be something wooden. Something wooden's often good, or a picture or a painting on the wall. And actually look at the details. So wood is really good because you've got all the texture, the sense of grain, and so on. So how often do we really see the grain in the wood of the furniture around? Or how often, once we put a picture up on the wall, do we actually look at the detail of that picture? Almost like we've got an image, oh yes, there's a picture of so-and-so, or there's this table and it's made of wood or a bit of furniture. And we rarely actually see clearly or perceive clearly what's actually there. It's just like we have an image. Here's a picture there. And you don't really look at it. You don't perceive it clearly. So that's the first aspect. So quite often we're using a map of our experience rather than looking at our experience or experience, well, it doesn't have to be any of the senses, really perceiving what's going on in its richness and fullness. Another way of distinguishing clear and unclear is, do we perceive its conditioned nature? So we all intellectually know things rise in dependence upon conditions, and upon the ceasing of those conditions, they cease. But when we perceive, do we perceive clearly and have an understanding or an experience of those changing conditions, of the changing nature of what we're perceiving? I think a lot of the time we don't. We fix things, as I've just said. A kind of a classic example for me, I meet someone for the first time, I get to know them, and say, for example, they have children, and I say, how old are your children? And they say, I don't know, 6 and 8. I go, okay, person X has 2 children, one's 6, one's 8. And that goes into my mind, and I remember that. And I always remember that this person has children aged 6 and 8, even though kind of on a certain level I know they've got older. In my mind, I've kind of fixed them. I've got this sense of, this person has children 6 and 8, and there's no sense of movement through time of these children, that they get older. So it's seeing clearly the conditioned nature of what we're perceiving. I'm going to move on to uncategorized perceptions. You're going to keep this fairly simple. Young children, in a way, because they don't have language, don't have the labels that we put on things. They don't have the label necessarily door or whatever other object. So for them, they don't have the categories of in terms of their perception. But this can also happen to us. We can come across something and we don't know what the label is. Heard quite a nice example of this a number of years ago. There was a native German speaker staying with some friends of mine, and she looked out the window and there was an object in the garden, and she didn't know what the English name for the object was, and she had to try to describe the object because she didn't know what it was called. I was like saying, what's that object in the garden? They said, which one? the one with handles, the one that you put things in, the one with a wheel, and eventually it's like, it's a wheelbarrow. So sometimes in terms of language, we don't actually know what something is in terms of labels. So that's in a way a simplistic example. I think it's also interesting, particularly when we start, say, meditating, and we start to explore our own internal experience. We start to have experiences which we don't know the label of. We have an experience and we use a label and we know it's not that. So we may be experiencing an emotion, and you may kind of initially say, oh, I'm experiencing, say, anger. And you can say, it's not anger. That's not the right word. I don't know what this is. I don't know what the label is. So to start off with, it's uncategorized. So we have an experience and we're not sure what that experience is. Sometimes as we get used to exploring our internal experience, we do start to get new labels. So rather than anger, you may get, actually anger for this particular emotion isn't the right one. It may be frustration, which has some connections with anger, but it may be quite skillful rather than unskillful. So it's interesting to look at how do we deal with our uncategorized perceptions, particularly our uncategorized, our unknown perceptions internally. And then the last classification is perception based on it. The traditional way of putting it is perception based on our experience of the realms of existence. So some of you may be familiar with what are often called the three realms of existence. So we have Kama Loka, Rupa Loka, and Arupa Loka. So Kama Loka is the realm, Loka is realm, realm of desire. The Rupa Loka is the realm of form, and the Arupa Loka is the formless realm. And we may be familiar with some of this in terms of the Wheel of Life, which some of you will be familiar with as an image, or also in terms of our experience in meditation. So when we first start settling in our meditation practice, we may have what's sometimes called a hindrance present. So we may have a sense of greed, hatred, delusion, kind of too much energy, too little energy. And this puts us in the realm of desire. And the realm of desire is gradated. So we may be familiar with what we call access concentration, where the gross hindrances subside and everything just starts to brighten up in terms of our meditation experience. And then if we get more concentrated, we may have an experience of what we call the first dhyana, which is part of, if you like, a rupa loka, a form realm experience. Excuse me. So it may be, sometimes more kind of a mythical realm, maybe more of archetypal realm, or a more spiritual realm, which is characterized by rapture and bliss. And as some of you know, there's 4 dhyanas of form, and then there's formless dhyanas. So the expression or the list of qualities perception based on our experience of the 3 realms, it's saying something really quite interesting. It's saying that we perceive the world based on the quality of our experience. So if we're very distracted, we'll experience the world in a distracted way. If we're very angry, it will probably feel like the world is almost out to get us and to attack us. And wherever we look, we're being thwarted supported. If you've had a good metta bhavana meditation, the development of loving kindness, it may feel more open that actually the world is a wonderful place, people in the world are wonderful, and so on. So depending on where we are in terms of our scale of meditation, it depends on how we perceive the world. So most people have had an experience of this, that they meditate, we get a little bit more concentrated and access concentration. And as we get out of meditation, leave the meditation session, the world is just a bit brighter, just a little bit clearer. We see things almost in technicolor, or the other sense versions of technicolor. And if we experience dhyana, we come out of meditation and the world is incredibly vibrant, rich, alive. So it's worth exploring that. So our perception of the world depends in a way on our mental state. I remember a number of years ago, I had this brought home to me quite clearly. I was on a longer retreat at a place called Cuculeca, which is a retreat center in Spain, in the hills above Benidorm. And over 16 weeks, meditate quite a bit. And my meditation experience was quite varied. And I'd go out of the shrine room. And quite often my hut was the furthest away from the shrine room. And behind it was a rock. And you could just look out over the valley. And depending on how the meditation had been, at times that place, that valley, was just hell on earth. I just hated it. I just wanted to be out of it. Other times, it was heaven on earth. It was just the most beautiful, the most perfect place. And I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. I could just stay there forever. The rock I was standing on hadn't changed. The valley hadn't changed. Maybe the weather did a bit. But my mental states did. So depending on our mental states is how we perceive the world. So it's almost like our mental states have an aesthetic or an anti-aesthetic quality. So by developing higher states of consciousness, as it were, or higher or deeper experience of meditation, we refine our perceptions. So perception is conditioned in many different ways. It can be conditioned by our language, it can be conditioned by whether it's accurate or inaccurate, whether our perceptions are clear or unclear, whether it's something we don't know or we don't know how to perceive it, and it has an aesthetic quality to it. I suppose ultimately we let go of that whole process of perceiving. We saw this last week when we were looking at consciousness, and the Buddha's advice to Bahia was in the seen, only the seen, in the heard, only the heard, in the sensed, only the sensed, and in the cognized, only the cognized. It's almost like we let go of that labeling, of that perception, and we just experience things directly. And if we do that, then we then start to, as Avalokiteshvara said in the Heart Sutra, sunder the bonds of suffering. So I'll leave you with that thought.